Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Online Warriors podcast. It's the last episode of January. The cold, dark January is finally over. I think most people would be happy about that, right? No one likes January. Does anyone out there like January? Leave us a comment.
I like January.
It's fine.
So you have a reason to like January, but I bet you still don't really like it.
Well,
Like,
okay.
Yeah, you don't like it. You're hesitating. You're in the immediate fallout from the holidays, the most fun time of the year. I think pretty unassailably the most fun. People probably like summer too, but like
I think March
the holidays
is when it's like a lull, and then once you hit March, it's like then you really start to. Usually daylight savings time comes. The days now are like significantly longer. So yeah, it's the lull. This is the lull of winter.
So you're saying February also bad?
Yeah.
I do think I agree. No love for Valentine's Day?
No, we love Valentine's Day. Don't get me wrong. We've already got plans figured out.
Yeah, we do.
I do think I want to bring back. See, this is the problem with life these days. Is remember when you were in elementary school? Fast forwarding to Valentine's Day for a moment. I'm Illeagle 86. I'm joined by Nerdbomber and Techtic. Let's get that out of the way.
Do you want to get Valentine's Day cards for your friends?
Well, I want to remember in elementary school when you would do the little you would pick whatever your favorite Disney movie was that year or whatever. You would go to the store.
You get those little paper things.
You get those little paper things, and you just put a single piece of candy in there. The stakes are not high here. And it just
the stakes were very high though, because they always came with like the ones that were a little bit bigger than the other ones, or like they had like 5 in the pack that were foil, and you had to decide who
your favorite people were.
Yeah, who are your favorite people? Which of your friends got the foil ones?
See, I actually stopped giving them to people because in like kindergarten there was this girl that was like very like flirty.
It was me.
With me. And so I was like, oh, I like her. I'm going to give her my Valentine's Day candy. She's going to be my Valentine.
One of the special ones.
She was also flirty with my brother.
It wasn't me.
playing the field.
Yes, and we didn't know. And so she got both of our Valentine's Days. And
did it ever occur to you that maybe she couldn't tell you guys apart because you're brothers, and maybe she thought she was just flirting with one of you?
Now, she gave us also both Valentine's back, so it was like reciprocated. But like, what are you gonna do with 2 men? You know what I mean?
Well, wait,
boys. This was kindergarten.
I mean,
right? I'm confused here. So when I went through this process, it was the entire class. I was given Valentines to everybody. Now, granted, as Nerdbomber said, there were like certain special Valentines in the pack.
I never had a class Valentine's Day thing. It was always like this after school or before school bus exchange.
Every person, like you had to get that little like paper lunch bag and you had to decorate it, and that was your mailbox. Mm-hmm. And everybody in the class had a mailbox.
Never
you had to put stuff in everybody's mailbox.
That is
and
correct.
If you skipped somebody's mailbox, you got in trouble.
Right. It's the school environment fostered an environment of everyone got one. It was great. And yeah, you could play favorites amongst because again, there were some special ones, but like think a little bit about the companies that are making those Valentines encouraging kids to play favorites.
You know,
way. I
wish I had that training as a young kid, because by the time I got to 5th grade, there was this girl that I was smitten for. And I guess I didn't have the cubby training of identifying who gets what cubby. And I gave it to her best friend. And
man,
that's a no-no.
Yeah.
It feels like we could do a whole secret segment, deep dive, unpack of your Valentine's Day
traumatic.
A special February edition of a traumatic secret segment. But yeah, Valentine's Day is coming up. I want to bring that back though. I want to get everyone at my office. I just want to get like 50 of those things and just give everybody like a little Hello Kitty.
What's stopping
freaking you? Little Valentine. Well, I don't know. Propriety doesn't feel like the right thing to do in this day.
Yeah, but it's not like harassment or making an advance or anything like that. If you just give them to everybody.
Yeah, if you give them to all, you're just spreading good cheer.
But then you have to make sure you don't forget. It's a sticky wicket. You either give it to everybody, but then if you miss somebody, you've singled that person out. So I would just do it to some small group. That's like a predetermined group. Like
see, now it is high stakes.
Plant the seed right now and be like, Pen Pal Club and then get it for Pen Pal Club. But like they don't know that they're going to get Valentine's Day.
So just to be clear, you want me to create a Pen Pal Club at my office,
A fake
where we
office
see
club
each other almost every day?
to ultimately let you give them Valentine's.
Are we required to write each other letters other than just doing the Valentine's
Yes.
Day thing? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
If your
I'll have
company
to
has
think about
other
that.
branches or something, maybe it's between your branch and their branch.
Oh man, can you imagine if I express mailed a single like Dora the Explorer Valentine with a single Tootsie Roll in it, like many states away to the other branch of the company, using company money? I think we're onto something here now. Valentine's Day is coming up. January's over. You get the idea. It's cold and dark. It's going to be cold and dark for a little while longer. But the other thing about February that makes February superior to January is that it's shorter. Every year actually, because even on the leap year, it's only a day longer, right? February is a weird month. We gotta look into that.
Well, that's why there needs to be 10-month calendars, because then every month can be equal and it works out mathematically better. Really just like Augustus and Julius were like self-centered and they added those 2 months in there. That's why October, Oct, 8, December, Dec, 10, it works. They fucked it up.
Again, this feels like secret segment fodder. Don't worry, folks. We have actual news to get to today. We're not just going to talk about calendars and Valentine's Day for forever, but it is. We're talking about the Xbox Developer Direct today. We got a deep dive into 4, technically 5 upcoming games that we are going to dig into for the entire first half of the episode. That's right. It's a double stack topic. We're going to take a short break and we're going to come back and talk about the White Lotus, which I have a very interesting relationship with. We'll get into that. But I do want to start with the Developer Direct. And I have a couple of, before we get into the individual games, this was I think like 55 minute video. You can go watch it on YouTube right now if you're so inclined and in ingesting the content before we kind of dissect it. I have 2 questions. One is just for you, Techtic. This is a special Techtic prepared question that I thought would be interesting. I'll ask the group question first, though. The group question first is, out of these 5 games, because I am counting there are 5 games here, you can only buy one right now. And before you say anything, yes, I know you guys have Game Pass. You don't have to buy any of them. I get that. But let's say you didn't have Game Pass for a second. You have to buy one of these games. Which one would you buy?
So this is really tough for me because I never have one top game. I always have either 2 top games or I say they were all great. And for this, I did narrow it down to my top 2. But it's
You have to pick one. I'm sorry. This is a discussion.
Gun to my head, brains are on the floor. Okay, painted on the wall.
So you're just dying. You're not gonna. You'd rather pick none than pick one. Just to be clear.
I guess in the same vein of blood splattered on the walls, I'd go Doom if I had to. But
Okay. Yeah, see, there we go. We wormed it out of you. I don't even need to know why right now. I kind of just curious before we get into this. We're going to talk about each of these games, obviously. But Nerdbomber, what spoke to you here?
I think Expedition 33. They all look great, but Expedition 33.
Yeah, this is interesting because for sure mine was South of Midnight. So I think we all have something.
That was my tied for first was South of Midnight.
Well, it wasn't tied for first because you picked Doom.
Because there was a gun to my head.
Second. Well, that's how the game works. We'll get into each of these, but it's interesting that we have kind of a diversity of opinion here. Before we do, though, again, my other overarching question, Techtic, you've mentioned on the show before that you are a burgeoning game developer in your own right. You're tinkering, you're trying to figure out how to get something to go. This, contrary to other showcases we talked about on the show, this is a developer direct. It's very focused on. It's very gameplay forward in terms of the footage that you see, but it's also very focused and very dialed into the people that are making it, what's inspiring them, what is driving them down the path to make these games, and in particular, when it comes to franchises, what both differentiates a game from its predecessors and also retains common DNA. As someone who's getting into this field, I don't want to put you on the spot necessarily or put pressure on you, but was there any particular takeaway that you had at any point? And you maybe don't even need to answer now. We can pick it up along the way as we talk through these games. But I have to acknowledge that I was thinking about you for a lot of this because, I'm not dipping my hand into this pond myself. But as knowing someone who is, I was thinking about that a lot of like, what would I take away from this if I was, looking to get into it as a practice?
So what I would take away from this is Expedition 33 is an impressive feat. It's first and foremost what I would take away from this, because that is a, for lack of a better term, small group of friends that came together to make that game. And the level of polish that they were able to put together as a ragtag bunch of misfits is wildly impressive to me.
We're seeing, one of the things that's on display in a showcase like this is a diversity in approach, right? Because I think you can contrast that situation, which, as you adequately described, like, it was essentially just a group of friends coming together, seeing a gap in the industry and treating it like a passion project, which has now picked up steam and is, it's achieving its full realization.
More like Steam's going to pick up it.
Right, exactly. But then you also have things like, Doom the Dark Ages, which is just, id Software is just kind of doing the next thing, right? And that's not me trivializing what Doom the Dark Ages is, which we'll talk about, but it's a different process, right? You're an established studio with an established, group of people that have been making these games for a while, and they're also a much larger studio, so there's probably a lot more diversity in what people want the game to be and what they can bring to the experience. So there's a lot of different approaches on display, and South of Midnight, Ninja Gaiden, like, maybe are in between those two things, but it was interesting to see to some extent, the guts of that. But getting into the games themselves, I'm going to go in order of what was revealed. I have no Ninja Gaiden experience myself.
Same.
We got a lot of content here. Again, interviews with the developers, discussing what their inspirations were, where they drew inspiration from. Again, kind of talking a lot about trying to retain some of the franchise's successes while also creating new and exciting combat styles. For my take, which again is very minimal considering my exposure to this franchise, like, it looked very polished. It's not typically my kind of game from a combat perspective, but it looked like it could be very fun. It looks like a game I would be terribly bad at. That is one thing that I immediately clocked, just in terms of combos and stuff. The only game where I've ever felt like I really had a lot of success with that sort of thing is the Arkham series. And for all I know, this does play similarly to that, but there's a lot happening. It's very frenetic, almost overstimulating, and there is a whole lot of gore. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily fully against the gore aspect in particular. It's visually, I would again, I guess, use the word overstimulating, where I don't know if I would be able to mentally function within that environment to the extent that the game would require me to.
So the biggest takeaway of this is not gory hack and slasher, because that is sort of like, that's what's in your face. The thing that was really cool to see was the dynamic moveset that they had. There was, combos where you can lift them up out of the air and spiral down and slam them. And then it was, in addition to these massive attacks, there was also really cool counters that you can implement to keep the combos going. And it just looked like a really smooth and dynamic, and I know I keep saying dynamic, but fighting style. And it really kind of played well with, there was a couple like ninja-based characters, there were samurai-themed characters, and it really played with those different fighting styles and enemies and good guys' approaches to combat.
In terms of the busyness and the freneticness of at least what's going on the screen, I kind of felt the same way. However, Team Ninja worked with Platinum Games on this, and a Platinum game that I played was Astral Chain. I believe that was Platinum Games. And very similar visual style, where the game itself looked really interesting to me. So I kind of gave it a shot, even though it seemed very frenetic and like there was a lot going on. And even though there's a lot happening on the screen, somehow you're able to still lock on. So I'm very confident that they'll find that good balance with this game as well, where, yeah, there's a lot going on the screen, but like you're focused on your character and the visuals just kind of fade into the background a little bit, and it doesn't impact your ability to focus on the game. That said, outside of the combat, I really liked a lot of the like parkour elements. And again, I don't have experience with this franchise, so maybe this was something that, was in the franchise previously, but games like Ghost Runner, like this reminded me of that, like wall running and riding rails and hopping between rails. Like that part of the game really spoke to me, because I feel like we don't have a ton of like platforming games out there anymore, like the 3D platforming. And I know this is not like your standard 3D platformer like you would think of like a Crash Bandicoot or something like that, but we don't have a lot of those like 3D platformer action on rail type deals. anymore these days. And so like that really stood out to me and made me interested in maybe getting into this franchise when I haven't in the past.
Yeah, I mean, the Ghost Runner comparison is actually one that I had written down that I was going to make. Again, more speaking to the idea that I would be terrible at this game because Ghost Runner was a demo. I tried the demo of Ghost Runner, and I don't think I've ever felt like a worse video game player in my life playing that game. And yeah, like the wall running in particular, I saw that and I was like, oh, it's like Ghost Runner. Yeah, I would never be able to do this. I agree. The platforming elements look really cool. I also think it's interesting, and I'm inclined to attempt to analyze, knowing not much about the overarching story, but, seeing that it's basically a very fantastical ninja-driven story that takes place in Tokyo, blending, real urban environments with, this falling demon rain or whatever it is they call it, kind of just destroying everything. I really applaud, I think it's probably most games, but games like this in particular establish that really fantastical, fairly unbelievable story world, and then proceed to take it about as seriously as anyone's ever taken anything. And that's one of the things that I think makes video games great just as a medium. And it's something that I think movies often really struggle to do, especially these days, but video games always tend to pull it off. And this was a really good example of that. So Ninja Gaiden 4 coming to PlayStation 5, Windows PC, the Xbox Series, and all of these games, I should mention, day one Game Pass. I did appreciate that the developer direct, before showing anything, basically said, hey, all of these games are day one Game Pass, cross-platform, all of that stuff. Really just encouraging before anyone saw anything that, hey, these are all very accessible to anyone who is in our special secret club. That's just good marketing right there. The kind of follow-on announcement to Ninja Gaiden 4 was that Ninja Gaiden 2 was getting a remaster, Ninja Gaiden 2 Black.
Which, by the way, that's what put Ninja Gaiden on my radar. I distinctly remember in the 360 time period seeing that game going, wow, that looks so cool. But it was deemed too gory for me at the time.
Now is your time to shine.
Everyone calm down.
Originally released in 2008 on the Xbox 360, as Techtic said. I don't have much to add to this that I didn't say about Ninja Gaiden 4, but what I will say is I find it an interesting decision, not knowing much about the franchise, that they would remaster this one instead of Ninja Gaiden 3. I think the intent here to some extent is probably to create an on-ramp for newcomers to the franchise, right? I guess they're picking Ninja Gaiden 3 because it's ostensibly their most successful entry, but it isn't as smooth an on-ramp into Ninja Gaiden 4, right? They're skipping one. Maybe the story world is such that that's not a big deal. Maybe there's a nonlinear temporal chronology. I don't know. But I just thought that was an interesting choice. I'm not saying it was a wrong choice. It was something that I noticed. That is out right now, by the way. Ninja Gaiden 2 is out right now. If you would like to go play it right now, you can do that.
I'm a big fan, by the way. This isn't like an opinion on the game at all, but I'm a big fan of during a showcase dropping something immediately, being like, oh, hey, this is here now. Have fun. Enjoy.
Yeah, this is typically something that Nintendo does a lot, but it is cool to see, certainly Microsoft do it as well. I totally agree. Moving on to what was ultimately my favorite in the showcase, South of Midnight. Now, this is definitely a game that we have discussed on the show before. I remember discussing it probably in the context of a different showcase, simply because the visual style is very, very distinct. It's inspired by motion capture, so it just stop motion, I should say. It just has this very distinct feeling visually. I was in particular, when we first talked about this game, I don't remember being particularly wowed by it. I think the developer direct and the format of the delivery of the content here really did a lot for me in terms of raising my level of interest. I think in particular, I want to highlight the combat, because they spend a lot of time talking about the combat when it really seems fairly simple. It seems like there's basically 3 weapons that you can use and only a handful of moves for each. It's just about timing. They specifically mentioned it being about timing. Nerdbomber, did this combat remind you of anything? Because it reminded me a lot of God of War when I was watching it.
Yeah, sort of like God of War. It kind of gave me vibes. I haven't played Forspoken. I haven't played it yet, but watching the trailers, something about the flow movement kind of reminded me of the trailers that we saw for Forspoken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not overly complicated. It's not as frenetic as Ninja Gaiden was. It's you have to time things correctly.
Methodical.
It's very methodical. That's a very good way to put it. Yeah. So again, that reminded me of God of War. Like you have some ranged attacks, you have some close-up attacks, you have a couple of special abilities you can use, but you're not really blowing the doors off at any point. This game, I believe, also highlighted skill trees. I think every game that we saw had skill trees, some of them being pretty intense, which we'll get to.
What was really interesting about this showing is it went beyond what we saw last time. Like we actually got they explained that it's stop motion that they use to make the animation, whereas we just saw the trailer last time. They also explained like kind of a little bit of what the lore is, how she's able to kind of weave the fabric between everyone and everything, and that's the basis of her power. And I wish they showed more of that back then, because I feel like it would have built a lot more hype early on.
I know, I remember being hyped for the trailer when I initially saw it. Something about like, this is my caliber of games. And I know I didn't pick this as like my number one favorite, but when I take a step back, like this is my caliber of games. I'm not going to say this is a AAA game because I don't really think it is, but this feels like that in between of AA and AAA magic, you know, from like I always go back to this, the 360 era, when there was more middle ground. Everything wasn't this like $1 zillion budget game, but it wasn't an indie game either. There was like that, there was clearly money invested and people who had a lot of industry experience and a lot of artistic intent. And again, I'm not saying that indie games don't have all of this, but particularly like the investment behind the game. And I feel like this is that sweet spot. And this is the type of game that I have been yearning for and missing in my life.
Yeah, I mean, also elements of platforming in this game. I know we mentioned that a little bit in Ninja Gaiden too, but this one definitely displayed a little bit of that as well. And above all, I think the main thing that this group of developers wanted to get across in the Direct was a fairly profound commitment to the story world that they are portraying. And, you know, you mentioned the lore, this, you know, I can't remember the terminology they kept using. It's Deep South, but it's not rustic. There's another word that Deep South Gothic is what the terminology was. There's a lot of interesting lore there that's true to life, and they're very committed to portraying that. And they have some creative license in how they portray certain characters that are not fully visualized, but like there's lore that they are very, you know, adherent to. And I just really respected that approach as well. So this one comes out April 8th. And can be pre-ordered now. Again, same thing as before. I don't remember if this one was going to be out on PlayStation. I don't remember mention of that, which again made me sad. But, you know, what else is new? Clair Obscure, Expedition 33. I'm going to turn the floor over to whichever of you said it was your favorite. I believe that was Nerdbomber. I mean, turn-based has never, ever been my thing, and it never will be. I know this is quote-unquote reactive turn-based, so it's trying to put a spin on that. I will say this one looked like the graphically most impressive one to me. That's another little... I can always talk about triangles, and this one seemed to have the most triangles, which is great. But yeah, the gameplay isn't for me, so I'll turn it over to you to gush.
What really drew me to this game, first and foremost, is the story. I mean, I feel like we've talked ad nauseum about how I am a very story-driven game player. Like, obviously, I'm addicted to Balatro, and I've played a stupid amount, something like 50 hours in the last 2 weeks of Balatro, and that doesn't have a story, and I get that. And so I might eat my words in a way, but I love a good story in games. I feel like video games is such a great way to tell a good narrative, because there's nothing quite like a video game. Like, I love books, I love movies, I love TV shows, but nothing puts you into a story quite like a video game. And I just think this is a very interesting, like, I love sci-fi, I love fantasy. So having this world where there's some random mythical painter person who is basically just counting down ages and people just disappear if you're that age, and they have to send a team of people to go try to stop them, is such an interesting story that even though I'm also not much of a turn-based player, I'm really digging the whole aesthetic and the storytelling vibe here. And that said, while I say I don't love turn-based games, we've played For the King 2 recently, we've played Paper Mario for the Still Loading podcast recently, and I don't hate turn-based combat. It's not my first choice, but like, I also grew up on Pokemon. So it's in my blood and my DNA that I can play turn-based games, but also the reactive turn-based, if you've never played something like that. So going back to Paper Mario, essentially you make your selection, but then it still keeps you in the game. Like, you have to react to something. And I know it's kind of like QuickTime eventy, but it keeps you engaged. And it's not just like, make a selection, watch a screen, make a selection, watch a screen. There's still involvement in your choices. So I feel like it's probably going to find a good balance between, the passive decision making of, turn-based combat and the more active involvement of QuickTime event. So I don't know. I thought this was really interesting. In addition to like the small team that we talked about earlier, I don't know. I'm jazzed for this. I always love seeing stuff from new small teams that kind of seems innovative.
I have a couple comments about this one. One, they made 30s look old. Okay, so they need to maybe make those characters look a little younger.
I don't think they made him look old. The guy just rocked a beard.
He looked old. Secondly, the age ticker thing, witch counter thing, like, how do you come up with that? That was just like the coolest, most interesting, I don't want to call it like Avengers Snap concept, but like this is right? This is an interesting concept, and we just haven't seen this type of plot before, and I'm here for it. I'm curious if there's some kind of mythology or something that it's based off of, because that would be really neat.
Yeah, it's a very simple premise that you can describe in a single sentence, which again serves this format for describing it very, very well. Yeah, I certainly mentioned the triangles. The one knock I have, again, maybe just as a turn-based player, but I don't even think this is a turn-based thing. When they were going through with this one, the skill trees, and in particular when they mentioned the Lumina and having each character has basically hundreds of passive effects that you can apply Lumina to, my brain shut off. I was like, oh my God, I would never... I cannot even imagine the analysis paralysis that I would experience in those menus. Each character, so there's four or five characters, and each of them has over 100 passive effects. No, I'm out. That's insane. That's too intense.
But it's no different than Balatro, where you can do whatever you want. You can. I go back to Balatro because it's like consuming my brain. But you can change the cards in your deck. You can get any of 100 and some different jokers. Like, possibilities are endless.
But the choices are doled out to you, and you're not immediately presented with, here's 100 different things you can do. Pick 10 of them. Like that to me is just it's a burden of choice. But I do think that I'm probably in the minority, in particular with respect to turn-based game players, who I imagine looked at that and probably thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So, again, that's a just me concern. Clair Obscure Expedition 33 will be released on April 24th. So April is, I think, where most of these releases were falling, just for everyone's awareness. I believe the next and final game we're talking about is May 15th. We are left with Doom: The Dark Ages. So this game, I'll turn it over to you in a minute, Techtic, here to talk through this one. But this is actually a prequel to Doom 2016, which, they were saying it's a good entry point for people. The basic gist that they were giving here is that, Doom 2016 was run and gun. Doom Eternal was fly and gun, jump and gun. Doom: The Dark Ages is stand and fight. That was kind of the one-line combat description of this game.
I loved that descriptor because Doom Eternal, when I watched Nerdbomber play that, it seemed too, I don't want to call it dizzy, but it seemed too dizzying for me. Stand and fight is my vibe. I'm bullet sponge in this. This is like back to its roots, OG Doom. I'm here for this. And the other line that I thought was fantastic for this is they called it a Dark Ages medieval war against hell. Oh my goodness, sold. And then on top of that, they threw in a cybernetic dragon and a 30-story mech suit that you get to kill hellish demons in. Yes, this is like a teenage boy's wet dream. You know what I mean? Like this is just like heavy metal, demons, like, I'm here. I'm in.
There's no doubt that their main goal, which I do think that they fulfilled, giving people more of what they like. And yeah, they are putting a spin on it with the stand and fight thing. But like, I did find it very amusing when they were like, we have our soundtrack people, they were Finishing Move, I think was the company. We have them working on brand new tracks. And in the background, I hear basically the same exact music as was from Doom 2016. And like, you don't need to change the music that Doom is now, since the 2016 version, like, that is entirely what it is about. It's just going around fighting stuff. There are certain things that you probably don't really need to re-engineer. It seems like they didn't re-engineer the music, and I'm not saying that they should have. I guess, if I had a knock on this game, and this may just be, again, a function of you're watching gameplay from someone who's basically designed the game, it looks way too easy. Like, it looks like not a moment of it is going to be challenging based on the footage that we saw, some of which was fairly extended.
But I think that's by design. I think they want you to feel powerful.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I personally would like to be challenged. And granted, they did say that the difficulty was highly configurable in this game, which I thought was very interesting. It's not just pick a single like, easy, normal, hard. It's like you can pick normal, but then your finishing moves might have a wider radius, and you can apply this much speed to your, it got a little bit more into the weeds on that. I also certainly appreciated that they are really like, they showed like side by sides with like the original Doom and then certain enemies that were doing the same thing. I thought that was really, really cool.
In terms of the easiness, I almost wonder, like every time that you watch a Doom trailer, it wants you to think that you're going to feel like super mega powerful. And I think at one point too, they even said like this is like a power fantasy or something. Not in those words, but like they made...
No, it wasn't those words.
Was it really?
Remember them saying that. Yeah.
So I feel like in the trailer, they're not going to make it look hard. I'm sure in practice, when you're playing it, it's not going to look as easy as they made it.
Yeah, because I mean, in my experience with the franchise, granted, I played Doom 2016, I never finished it. And like, I don't remember, but I bet one of the reasons I never finished it is that it was hard. And it has the same goal, right, of giving you this quote unquote power fantasy. And I'm sure you're right that in their marketing, they want to make it look like, oh, you're just going to be this unstoppable. I mean, Techtic, you said bullet sponge. Like, just, you're going to be this slayer guy who can slay anything and will slay anything. You're going to be in a giant mech suit and you're going to be untouchable. Like, in practice, video games just typically don't work like that. I think I would kind of just like to see, like, I don't know if I get anything out of seeing a developer just skate through it like that. I get why it's good for the marketing, but I didn't find it particularly interesting. But maybe that's just me. There was a saw shield. They talked a lot about the saw shield, which I thought did look very cool.
That looks...
Yeah.
As someone, I mainlined somebody who primarily used a shield in Dragon Age the Veilguard, and there is something extremely satisfying about throwing your shield at something, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that.
Yeah, this one's going to be a hit. I mean, no real doubt there. This was probably the biggest publisher out of all of these, and like, I think that at this point they've sustained critical mass, and they have the momentum to just, unless what they come out with is just technically bad, which I think is unlikely, like it's going to do numbers, and it's going to start doing numbers on May 15th. So be on the lookout for that. If you have Game Pass, you had a lot to be excited about. And even if you didn't, you might just pick one of these and go buy it. And I think that's an okay approach too. We want to know from you, what did we like or dislike that you disliked or liked in the Xbox Developer Direct? You can hit us up on Blue Sky. You have at @owilleagle86.bsky.social. That's me. At @nerdbomber.bsky.social, at techtic.bsky.social, and at onlinewarriors.bsky.social. Hit us up there. Let's have a conversation about any and all of these games, and maybe the White Lotus, which we'll talk about here after the break. But before we get into our break, I would be remiss if I did not shout out our fantastic Patreon producer, Mr. Steven Keller. Steven's going to be back on the show with us very, very soon. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Be on the lookout for that. That is one of the many perks he enjoys as a Patreon producer on this show. Steven supports us at the night level on our Patreon. That is the highest of our 3 levels of support. He is a producer. He gets his producer shout out every episode. He gets input into the weekly game segment, which I will be hosting this week. It's about Oreos. And he also, of course, gets access to the monthly secret segment and the monthly vlog. And of course, I mentioned the guest spot on the show, which happens on occasion. There is also a Squire level of support, which gets you access to the monthly secret segment and vlog, and a page level of support, which gets you access to the monthly secret segment. So you can head over to patreon.com/onlinewarriorspodcast to get the details on any and all of those levels of support. Thanks again to Steven. We will be right back to talk about the White Lotus.
Hey there, everybody. Seth Heasley here from the Hugo's There podcast. Every month on the podcast, I have on a guest, and we discuss their choice of the winners of the Hugo Award for Best Novel. So if you are interested in nerdy books and nerds discussing books, head over to hugospodcast.com or search for Hugo's There anywhere you get your podcasts. Thank you so much.
All right, we are back to talk about White Lotus. Sorry, The White Lotus, Season 3. We got a trailer for this show the day we're recording this, and the show comes out for its 3rd season February 16th, 2025. Classic, it's going to release every Sunday, the way HBO does their thing. Here's the thing with White Lotus and me, all right? I think White Lotus is...
A White Lotus and me. White Lotus and me.
I think White Lotus is an amazing concept for a show. I think from the setting, and the resort setting, but also the fact that they can seamlessly change settings and characters each season, to just the general premise of someone dies every season and you spend the entire season trying to figure out who, and the character weave. I just think it's an amazing idea that I have never watched. My wife watches this show. She somewhat religiously watched both seasons. In particular, in the second season, I vividly recall sitting in the room while she was watching it and like playing a game on the Switch, so like kind of not really paying attention, but also like establishing a minimum level of investment in figuring out what happened. So in that sense, I guess you could say I kind of watched. The great thing about this premise is that I feel like I could jump into season 3 in a fairly seamless way and just kind of start watching it. And I said that to my wife and she got really mad at me. She said, no, you're not allowed to do that.
You're both correct. So this show does a really good job of having like standalone seasons. However, it also does a really good job of having subtle callbacks where if you're just jumping in, you're going to have a good time. But if you've been around for a while, you're going to enjoy those subtle winks at the previous season. So I think you're both right. I don't think anyone's in trouble here.
Yeah, I mean, the cast is... At this point, I imagine people are lining up to be in this show. I believe, is it Jason Isaacs? Is it the guy? Is it Scar from The Lion King? Is that him? Or is it somebody else? It is Jason Isaacs, who I believe was Scar in The Lion King. Walton Goggins, Leslie Bibb, Carrie Coon, Michelle Monaghan, Parker Posey, a bunch of other folks who I don't really know as well. But, this is what's so fun about The White Lotus, right? Is that I think it's the same formula for success as the Knives Out movies of like, by the time the second Knives Out came out, people were like, I just want to be in it because it's a Knives Out movie and I'm going to play a fairly small and undemanding role in a cast of characters that is somewhat large, and like I still might win an Emmy for it. And also it's just fun, right? Like if I was an actor, I would be going out of my way to try to be in a show like this. I think it's just so cool. As far as plot goes, I'm not sure that trailers like this are really going to give away the ghost super easily. Jason Isaacs appears to be running out of money, and that's going to be a major plot line. That's really the only... There's 3 ladies having like a girls trip that start, I guess, just dumping dirt on each other. I have no idea
so that's
what's going
status
on.
quo. It's seemingly people that are just there to have a good time and have no skeletons in their closet and ultimately end up having skeletons in the closet. Like that's the way the show works. So this is just on par for the formula.
The show is basically nobody's a good person. And they come to an island and that comes out.
Yeah. My mom, shout out to my mom. She doesn't watch the show or listen to the show. There's no way to watch, first of all, but she doesn't listen to the show. But she has an ongoing crusade against television that she says that most shows these days are just about how human beings are just fundamentally bad. And honestly, when you think about television in the past like 10 years, she's absolutely correct.
But I mean...
So, I don't know, I'm not saying that shows are incorrect for taking that approach either, if only to be true to life. But like, I think people also want TV to do things. Like, I think also the reason Ted Lasso was so successful is that it flew right in the face of that, and people wanted that, right? Because TV is supposed to be escapism in some respect. The White Lotus plays right into, like you said, everyone's a bad person, and that is at the heart of the show. It's immutable. They're not going to change that fact about the show, and no one's asking them to. This show is going to do absolute numbers. It's probably going to win a bunch of Emmys, and I think it probably should. And I do think I'm going to watch, because I also love a good mystery, and at the heart of it, these things are mysteries. It's kind of reversed, though, where, I mean, the murder kind of just happens at the end, and no one solves anything. You're just trying to pick up and try to predict what's going to happen, which I think is a great aspect of the premise. I'm going on a vacation to an all-inclusive resort in a little over a month, and I'll let you know if I meet any folks who kill each other. I don't know. Hopefully not. But this show kind of makes it seem like this stuff just happens, Hopefully it doesn't. So again, February 16th, 2025, this comes out. So not too long to wait now. This brings us to What Are You Up To Wednesday. This is the part of the show where we talk about what we've been up to. And I don't believe I went first last week, but I also think I went first the week before that. I don't remember who I had go first last week. I want to say it was Techtic, so I'm going to have Nerdbomber go first this week, but I might be totally wrong. Sorry to the listeners.
All right, I got some cool stuff this week.
It wasn't me. I didn't go first.
Well, I'm going first, so suck it. So I did 2 major things that I want to talk about. The first is that I started playing Indiana Jones, the new video game that came out, back like October, November. So I'm not super far in yet. I probably only played for like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. But you know what? It felt right for the time. You know, taking out Nazis and fascists and
punching Nazis.
Yeah. So again, I'm not super far in. The game does start a little bit slow. You're kind of like just walking through a forest. And that part, I feel like it could have gotten sped up a little bit. You're trying to find, you know, an artifact. So, but a lot of times you're just like following a guide. And I get there like setting the stage for what you're doing. You're going to be like bushwhacking and all that kind of stuff. That was a little bit of a slog. But then once the game got into it, there's puzzle solving. And once you actually get into like going on your first mission or adventure, a lot of it's very stealthy. And you basically have to like sneak around, at least the level that I've played so far. And pretty much anything can be a weapon, which I thought was really interesting. So you're walking around and like you have your whip and I think you have a gun, but you can also, if you're trying to be stealthy, you can pick up like a hammer along the way and it only has 2 hits in it before it breaks, but you can pick that up, or you can pick up a rake, or you can pick up a chair leg, or you can pick up a baseball bat, and you can sneak up behind guys and bop them over the head and then carry their bodies away so that you can continue to like stealthily move your way through the Vatican, not Vatican. I don't know. It was very satisfying. I haven't played a stealth game in a while. It obviously feels very, you know, high quality, very polished so far. And I'm looking forward to see where it goes. And Illeagle is blowing me up in our chat for saying Vatican. So yeah, like I said, I'm very, very early on in the game. So I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say about it as the weeks go on and I play a little bit more. But, you know, so far so good. I'm enjoying it. And secondly, we watched The Wild Robot, which, man, I cried.
It's supposed to be awesome.
It was awesome.
Yeah, it's supposed to be so good.
Techtic I'm convinced heartless because the end of the movie rolls around and he looks over at me and he's like, why are you crying? What part got you? Like, I don't get it. And I was just like, it is the saddest thing. Like, it was a very uplifting, hopeful movie. I don't want to give any spoilers. It was just like very heartfelt and emotional and touching and super well done. I love the movie. It's streaming on Peacock now. It's, you know, hit streaming services. If you haven't watched it yet, 100% recommend. Probably not just of animated movies, of like all of the movies that I've seen. That probably is the closest to rivaling Wicked for best movie that I've watched in a while.
Right.
That's a bold take.
It is a bold take from a bold lady.
Yeah.
I am very jealous of not being able to play the Indiana Jones game.
You can. So actually,
I'm not doing this.
No, we
talked about this.
This is a pertinent thing here, though. So Techtic, what are you up to? He'll talk about how he's playing on the PlayStation, but that means that I don't have access to the Xbox, which is not a problem because on my Steam Deck, I use cloud gaming and Game Pass, and you can too. And it was a seamless experience, had no issues, ran fine.
What a pitch. And you can too.
I'm not saying.
Doing it. I'm not doing it.
It's going to be on the PlayStation eventually. Isn't it releasing on PlayStation in like the next 6 months? So like you'll have a chance.
Good question, actually. But yeah, I fully intend to play that game. Right on, Techtic. I robbed you of your rightful first, so why don't you go ahead?
Wow, do you mean it?
You know, I really do. Looking out for you, buddy.
All right. Well, the 2 things that I want to talk about is first and foremost, we watched the movie and we talked about it on the show Saturday night. This show was, first and foremost, and we said this again, the casting I thought was absolutely spot on. The actors and actresses that they picked for each character did a great job. I'm not going to say this movie knocked my socks absolutely off, but this was a good movie. It wasn't bad. It was very entertaining. There was this constant chaos leading up to the first airing of the show. You didn't know if they were going to make it, and they just portrayed that very, very well. And then when it came to like actually executing the episode and mirroring what was released back in the day, it was like a mirror spitting image. It was just good job, good movie. I recommend it. It's like a solid 7 is what I'd give it. And then the other thing that I want to talk about is I had started playing Dragonball Sparkling Zero, and I've wanted to play this for a while. It's the latest and greatest in the Dragon Ball fighting games. It is challenging, I will say. I'm stuck on the Goku storyline with Jiren. It's just kind of like the end of it. And Jiren is just, what a pain in the ass. And I refuse to lower the difficulty, so I'm just going to keep being terrible to myself.
Attaboy. Right on. Well, for myself, I have a classic trifecta, a book, a movie, and a game. I'll try and be quick with all of them. The movie, my wife and I watched a movie called A Different Man. This is a movie that I believe Sebastian Stan just won the Golden Globe for Best Actor. It's a really weird movie. I don't know that I would call it a solid 7. It's probably like a 4. It had an interesting premise and a pretty solid first half, and then it kind of went off the rails, as a lot of movies of its ilk tend to do. It's about a guy who... Well, you should just go watch the trailer and decide if it's the experience for you, because I will say the trailer pretty accurately described what it was going to be. So watch that. I did finish Deliver Us the Moon, which I believe I talked about a little bit last week on the show. I have to say I was disappointed overall in Deliver Us the Moon. It did not live up to... I think I might have mentioned in my mini review last week that it's a game that thinks it's a lot better than it is and a lot more epic than it is, and that really never changed as I played through it. I found the puzzles all to be very, very easy, basically nothing to solve. And there was some mild platforming, but it kind of felt like a walking simulator with a little bit extra. There is a sequel that I would probably play for like an additional $3. This game costs like $3, so nothing really lost there, but also not a game that I would super recommend if I'm being honest. What I would recommend, and probably the highlight of my past week, I started a book called The Premonition by Michael Lewis. For those who think that name sounds familiar, he is the guy who wrote Moneyball and The Big Short and a bunch of other things that have been made into movies. The Premonition happens to be about the COVID-19 pandemic. So I believe it's his latest book. Picked it up at a used bookstore. It cost basically nothing. So it's been great so far. I tend to read a couple nonfiction books a year, and this is one of mine for this year, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I would super recommend it if you are into nonfiction and if you feel like we've established enough distance from the pandemic to read about it. I'm not saying they're going to I'm not saying the book makes light of it or anything, but it can be challenging to read about it when it feels like it's just so recently in the rear view. So yeah, that's it for my week. I would recommend that book. We are going to actually forego the quiz this week in the interest of peace and unity. that's just,
also,
how we do things around here.
To go out, so.
Yeah, we're on the precipice of a windstorm flicker issue.
For those who want a little look behind the scenes on the podcast, I was in the middle of my What Are You Up To Wednesday, and on our Discord chat, I got a message from Techtic saying, "No trivia, wrap it up."
To be fair, he followed it up with power flickered, do your thing. Yeah. But we're gonna skip trivia.
I got to play producer too. That's how we roll with the Online Warriors.
And he also said your ability to read and keep going is impressive, because if you rewind 30 seconds and listen to me talk about the Premonition, I'm sure you'll be able to hear me reading and talking at the same time, because there was some definite stumbling going on there. But look, these things happen. I have a human brain. I'm fallible. So the power's flickering. We're going to let you go, and we will come back with the Oreo quiz, which I do have prepared. So we'll hit the ground running next week. Get hyped for that. If you enjoyed what you listened to today, or if you didn't, you can head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Leave us a review. And we mentioned the Blue Skies, so hit us up there if you're interested in having a conversation. And otherwise, enjoy the beginning of your February, and we will see you guys next week. Stay safe and keep on podcasting.